Today's video looks at the ever-challenging discussion revolving around sequels to popular franchises and what does it mean when developers have to give and take on content to carry over or to expand on with new areas. When it comes to the AAA industry, one of the most popular forms of designing a game, or goals of a developer and publisher standpoint, is creating an iterative franchise. We are not just making games with new series or new designs every day, but you're working with an established franchise, something that you know people like, you know what the basic gameplay loop is, and you're able to grow that over as many years that franchise remains relevant. And not only that, but also cuts down the risk factors of developing something entirely original and hoping that people enjoy it. But with that iterative process and working on sequels, it creates a very tricky push and pull when it comes to developing games over multiple franchises. Now, for our topic today, we're not talking about franchises that are built on side stories or having different versions of the game based on the platform, such as Shin Megami Tensei has the main branch of its games, and then it has side stories like Digital Devil Saga, and of course, most notably, the Persona franchise. We're talking about franchises that go for either yearly iterations, or every few years it will continue to expand that franchise. Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Zelda, Assassin's Creed, and the one that's in the news right now being Pokemon. Now, I'm pretty sure by now you've probably guessed that the footage that's up there is not of Pokemon. I don't have any on the channel, and I'm not a huge fan of Pokemon to begin with, but that is a topic for another day. But the reason Pokemon is in the news comes from a reveal during E3 2019 for the next iteration. I believe this is the first console Pokemon game to be released in some time, and that's Pokemon Sword and Shield. It has been revealed that with this one, the developers are not going to allow you to catch every Pokemon in existence. Now, for those of you who don't know, Pokemon has been going on for a very long time. I want to say 96 or 97 was the first game released here in the United States, and a major point about them, of course, is the tag, "Gotta catch them all." And with each new game, more Pokemon are introduced. And then over time, what they do is, for each new region, they have their own set of Pokemon. But then you can either import, or they may have some of those legacy Pokemon show up in later games. So, for each new Pokemon franchise, you have this baggage, or this design baggage, of the previous iteration's Pokemon. And this has been going on for quite some time. And while I said I am not an expert in Pokemon, I think I looked up that there are now over 800 Pokemon in the game, or in the franchise, not including Sword and Shield. So it was announced with this latest one that those older Pokemon will not become available in this game. And it's got a lot of longtime Pokemon fans very upset, because that is all content that they've come to expect, and it's not going to be in this one. But, as we said a few minutes ago, there is a challenge when it comes to developing sequels to popular franchises, in terms of what should and shouldn't be kept going. Sometimes the developer may not want to develop something because it was either not popular or they felt it worked, and the audience may feel quite the opposite. But, as we all know, when it comes to game development, every piece of content in your game, from music, aesthetics, gameplay, and so on, is added time and time and money that goes into that development. And this becomes more and more when it comes to franchises. And this is kind of the double-edged sword when it comes to developing long-standing series. That as you keep adding new gameplay loops and new systems, people are going to begin to expect that stuff to become part of that franchise going forward. And when it's not in a game, it can cause a lot of negative opinions about developers cutting content, being lazy, and I'm sure we can think of a few more phrases there. But again, it raises this question as to what is considered feature complete for a franchise. Sorry about that, I had to answer the phone. But getting back to the topic, when we talk about franchises and how they constantly grow and add in new content, the question then turns to what kind of becomes locked for it, for good and for bad. Some big examples will of course be franchises like Assassin's Creed, which following number 2 and kind of the success it brought, each game, including the many side stories, started to implement new game systems to test the waters. No, actually, pun intended, as they eventually added in sailing and pirate ship. I think that was in Black Flag. But the point is, with each system that gets added, the question turns to, does that system belong in the next iteration? Now, in some cases, depending upon how the franchise grows or the setting, that may not be completely applicable. But when you start throwing in systems and designs and gameplay loops that people enjoy, when you go to make the next game, you run to this balance of what new to add and what are the elements you want to bring back or keep going. And there are a few weird exceptions to this rule. As we said earlier, with series like Nintendo, like Zelda, Mario, and Final Fantasy, those are 3 very long-running franchises in this industry. But for each game, they're essentially developed in their own unique little ecosystem. Nobody complained, or most people didn't complain, that Ocarina of Time was different from Link's Awakening, which was different from A Link to the Past, which was very different from The Legend of Zelda 2. Likewise with Mario, then with each iteration of a main Mario game, you get different elements, you get different challenges. Now, they're all still built on the same basic core gameplay loop of 3D platforming. But the use of Cappy in Mario Odyssey is certainly different than Flood in Super Mario Sunshine, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we got Final Fantasy, where each game literally takes place in a completely different universe, setting, and different game systems and sub-elements like that. Now, of course, there are a few long-running elements like the Chocobos, Sid, Summons, and so on. But again, nobody really complains or says that much when they get a new Final Fantasy game that is different in many ways from the previous. Even the big one, that was Final Fantasy 12, I think. I really enjoyed that one. That was completely different from all the other games. And again, depending upon the franchise, it really comes back to what are the core elements that make it up. And when you start throwing in different systems and different elements to try and test or muddy those waters, if people respond well to them, do you try to keep them in for future games? And as a second question, if there's an element of the game that you like that the audience did not respond to, do you try and make that better? Or do you just throw it out and try and start something else? Because that is the inherent risk when it comes to developing sequels to popular franchises. You're always trying to, again, balance what's old and what's kind of considered the standard with the new stuff to make it different. Because if you're just literally creating the same game over and over again, people aren't going to want to spend $50, $60 on it. Now, with that said though, we've brought up Pokemon as an example of kind of almost like falling or being crushed underneath all that backlog and that design baggage. But we could also say Smash Brothers being a really good example. People were joking about Sakurai talking about the amount of work that went into Smash Brothers Ultimate. And that game, I cannot imagine the amount of work, and especially the legal discussions that went into getting all those characters in. And I'm pretty sure if Nintendo turns around and says, hey, could you make another one with 300 more characters? He's probably going to like jump off the roof of Nintendo at some point. But again, it raises these kinds of discussions when we talk about iterations. That what happens if, let's say, I don't know, 3 to 5 years down the line, another Smash Brothers game gets designed or becomes the next development? Should it have everything that Smash Bros. Ultimate has? What if it doesn't? What if it does something differently? How will the fans respond? And can you even make another Smash Bros. Game? This is another big point about mega developments, that when you put everything and anything into a single game, it becomes that much harder to develop a sequel to it. A very big example would be World of Warcraft. It is now, I believe, 15 years strong, or maybe I think a little more than that at this point, of being released. Now, Blizzard could have certainly, and I'm sure they must have thought about designing a World of Warcraft 2 at some point. But could you even imagine trying to release a World of Warcraft 2 and having it compete with World of Warcraft 1? It would just be an insane proposition. And again, when we talk about mega franchises like this, you have to be really careful, as you may become crushed underneath the weight of this colossus that you have invented. But with that said, we're going to take a quick Patreon supporter and sponsor shout out. When we return, I'm going to talk about a franchise that, unlike Pokemon, I do have a dog in the fight when it comes to what content I was expecting and what I didn't get, unfortunately, when I bought the game. And now for a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters and current Game Wisdom sponsors. If you would like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. Recently, I've been playing Anno 1800, and this is the latest game in the long-running series by Blue Byte. The footage that you're seeing is from the pre-release demo, but trust me, I've been playing this off recording. And Anno 1800 is the latest, but the previous three games, Anno 1404, 2025, and 2205, each had unique systems and elements to them. In 1404, the game featured numerous scenarios that you could play that would test your economic, military, or a combination of the two in specific circumstances. It also had a very involved achievement and challenge list that would unlock new cosmetic items, profile pictures, etc., but it was all meant as a way to motivate you to play the game in different ways. 2025 introduced a persistence system in the form of the Arc, as well as map-wide challenges like building wonders you could go for. And then 2205 was just a completely different take on the design that we don't have the time to go into in this video. But the reason why I brought those three up is that Anno 1800 has none of them. There are no challenges, there's no persistence. The only content in the game as of this moment is multiplayer, a campaign, and just an open sandbox map with none of those additional challenges or rewards to go after. Even the achievement page is woefully shorter compared to that of 1404. And this takes us back to the point of our video today, that considering all the changes and major elements in previous Anno titles, should fans have expected that in Anno 1800? Now, in the game right now, the core gameplay loop is solid. No one could argue that this is not an Anno game. But when you're expecting certain elements or certain features and they're not there, do you have a leg to stand on when it comes to these complaints? And again, this goes back to the issue of Pokemon. That I am sure, like Pokemon with Game Freak and Anno 2 Blue Byte, that they probably went through a list of things they would like to have and what they wanted to, and they had to prioritize certain elements. But again, how much should be in a game, or more specifically a sequel, for it to be considered quote-unquote feature complete? Now, one thing to keep in mind for those of you watching this in the future, that they've already planned 3 pieces of DLC for 1800 that may or may not introduce more of that content back into the game. And if that is the case, this video may not be accurate along those lines. But when it comes to supporting long-running franchises, that it becomes a challenge of figuring out just what you should have in it. Now, with the previous 2 Anno games taking place in the far future, Obviously, certain elements there wouldn't necessarily work in a game aimed at the 19th century. This would be akin to thinking that in the historical Call of Duty games, the ones that take place during World War II, that we should have drone strikes and wall running. It would be a little out of place there. But it's important from a design standpoint, again, to sit down and figure out what elements people are expecting out of your game, and knowing what should be prioritized. Now, obviously, for those of you watching this, the easiest way or the quickest way would be to get player feedback or playtester feedback. But from a design standpoint, it's important to understand as quickly and as early as possible in the design process what elements are going to be the unique selling factors of your game. And that is another lesson and a half we could go into on this video. But with sequels, there's always been that inherent risk of how far to go out of the box and when to rein it in to have standbys. And for those of you watching this, I want to ask you, have you played games, or have there been any examples of franchise that you've played where the sequel to a game turned out worse than the game before it, whether it was because it adhered too much to that previous formula or went too far outside the box? And sometimes when it comes to franchises, that developers will experiment in some aspect. This is another major part of sequel design. The first game is your test bed. It is your blueprint to figure out people like this idea, and then it's the sequel that refines and iterates it, usually to the full capabilities of that gameplay loop. We've seen that in previous Call of Duties, Battlefields. My favorite example, of course, is the jump in quality from Assassin's Creed 1 to Assassin's Creed 2. And it's very rare for one game to get it right on its first try. But when you're building a legacy of games, it becomes harder and harder to make those course adjustments. A lot of people complain in Diablo 3, for instance, when they streamline and simplify a lot of the loot design as well as the character builds. It turned out Diablo 3 was still a good game, but it didn't feel the same way as the previous ones. And for that kind of design, many people turn to Path of Exile and Grim Dawn and so on. And you have to be really careful again when you're designing new stuff for a game or designing new features for a sequel. Because you can run into that situation where you are minimizing what people enjoyed out of your game. But the inherent risk, of course, or the risk and reward, is that you could be designing something that people will enjoy. And that could become a standout for future games in that series. One of the big examples, of course, is the prestige and leveling system seen in Call of Duty. That was not in the original games. And when that was introduced, I'm sure a few people looked at that and went, what is this thing? But that one system, or that one layer of persistence, has been a major role in the longevity and success of the Call of Duty franchise. And we can see this in many major sequels or many major franchises that have gone on to produce multiple sequels, that they will have something in them that is unique. Again, Legend of Zelda didn't just one day transform into Breath of the Wild. That took many iterations and designs and people figuring out and growing that design. And there will be a separate video on iterating design in the future. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up for now. Let me know what you guys think about the Pokemon side of things. Again, I am not a long-standing Pokemon fan in the slightest, so I have no dog in that fight. But what do you think about the design work that goes into each one of those? But thank you so much for watching this video. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until our next video, have a great day. If you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.